Julie was born in Benton, Arkansas, and grew up there. She went to Oklahoma to attend Oklahoma University. She worked at the golf course at the university. Julie wanted to be a ballerina, and after she graduated from college, she wanted to open a dance school and teach kids how to dance. Julie was said to be well-liked and have a lot of friends at school. She also had a lot of skills. On December 19, 1996, Julie and her friend Ryan James spent the evening at his grandparents' house. Ryan and Julie worked at the golf club together. They watched a movie after dinner. Also, they agreed to have lunch together the next day. Julie stayed at his grandparents' house until 10 p.m., when she left to hang out with some of her other friends. At one of her friends' houses, Julie and her friends played Monopoly and gave each other Christmas gifts. Julie said goodbye because she was leaving the next day to move back home. Her semester at college had just finished. Megan, who lives with her, was also there. Julie told Megan that she would drive her to Will Rogers Airport at 5 o'clock the next morning. Julie lived in the Dublin West apartments, where many people heard a scared woman scream. Someone from the neighborhood called 911 to report what they had heard. The resident stated that their wife had heard a really strange and horrible scream coming from the apartment complex's parking lot. The 911 operator asked what the problem was, to which the resident responded that they did not want to go outside and were actually afraid to do so. Ryan James showed up at Julie's place a few hours later for their planned lunch date. Julie wasn't anywhere to be found, and neither was her car. Then, Ryan said she was lost. Julie's folks came to her apartment not long after that. They got in their car and drove from Arkansas to help Julie move back home. Instead of Julie, they found police officers who told them she was lost. Julie Busken's body was found on the edge of a lake about 15 miles from her apartment, 12 hours after she went missing. Her hands were tied behind her back with shoelaces, and she was in the water up to her hips. Julie had been shot once, as if she were being killed. The back of her head was hit by a bullet, which caused a contact wound. Some signs also showed that she had been hurt at the lake. Near Julie's body, investigators found possible clues in the sand. 2 sets of feet went down to the lake, but only 1 set of footprints came back. The cops thought that the other set belonged to the person who shot Julie. After looking at the outline and talking to Nike about it, it was decided that it fit a size 9 men's Nike running shoe. More specifically, a Nike Air 2 running shoe. About 20 feet away from Julie's body, investigators found a pink leotard with the letters JB on the label. Julie owned it. The leotard had male DNA on it, so it was put away and will be used in the future when DNA technology is better. Julie was killed by a single .22 caliber bullet, which was proven by an autopsy. The gun used was very unique, but we'll talk more about that later. Julie Busken made a lot of friends when she went to college. An agent set out to talk to as many of them as possible in the hopes that someone would know something useful. But it wasn't like that. No one really didn't like Julie, and she didn't have any bad breakups or anything like that. Julie's flat was in great shape when the police went there. There were no signs that a fight was going on. They found Julie's car in an apartment complex just 1 block from where she lived. The red sand on the floor of the car looked like the red sand where Julie's body was found on the shore of the lake. The people who looked into this thought it was pretty strange. Why would someone take Julie away, kill her at the lake, and then drive her car back almost to the same spot where she was taken? There were no hairs, fibers, or prints from outside the country in the car. Also, there was no sign that there was a fight. Julie's phone had been taken. The police got her cell phone records to see if they could help. The cell phone records showed that she was called twice by someone after she had died. One was to ask about the weather, and the other was to a number that wasn't working at the time. Even though there were clues and a $7,000 prize, nothing big happened, and the case went cold for a while. Then, a man called the cops a month after Julie's death. He said that on the night Julie was taken, he almost hit a car like hers that pulled out in front of him. It was close to the lake. Because he wanted to talk to the driver, The witness followed Julie's car for about 5 miles. The driver kept looking at the witness in the rearview mirror and then drove away quickly. The witness got a quick look at the driver's face and then had to tell the police what he looked like. This is the drawing they made of the young man who was driving Julie's car away from the lake. He might have been a college student, and he might have been Hispanic. He had long black hair and a strong body. The Oklahoma media played the combined sketch over and over again. No one knew who he was. For 4.5 years, nothing was done about the case. A woman in jail in Oklahoma County wrote a letter to the police. She said that one of her old friends might have killed Julie. He was Dennis Sturmer, who was 23 years old. Sturmer worked in the building and had never been in trouble with the law. But at the time of the crime, he lived only 4 blocks from Julie's apartment, and the composite sketch looked like him. Sturmer wouldn't answer any questions and wouldn't give a sample of his DNA. To get his DNA, the police had to get a court order. The sample of DNA that was taken from the leotard at the crime scene was very, very close to his DNA makeup, so he was no longer thought to be a possibility. It looked like the mystery that had been going on for 5 years would finally be solved. But there was a twist. The DNA of his brother didn't match. The case went cold again. Julie's parents had to be sad about the fact that they might not live long enough to see justice done. Investigators were determined that this wouldn't happen, so they tried to get DNA samples from every man Julie had ever met. Tests were done on more than 200 guys, but no one matched. It seemed like no one would ever figure out what was going on. Anthony Castillo Sanchez was arrested for beating up his girlfriend 6 years after Julie's death. After being arrested, Sanchez had to give a sample of his DNA to the police so they could test it. Investigators looked into Sanchez's past and found some interesting things. He lived only 1 mile from where Julie lived. Investigators looked at the diary of one of Sanchez's lovers for the month that Julie died. On one note, she said that Anthony bought her a pair of Nike running shoes and also bought himself a pair. Sanchez wore shoes that were size 9. If nothing else, it showed that Sanchez had the same brand and size of sneakers as the person who did the crime. One of Anthony's ex-girlfriends had a cell phone number that was only off by 1 point from the number that was called on Julie's phone after she died. Sanchez might have tried to call the ex's number from memory, but made a mistake with 1 digit. Sanchez and his father had a strange habit of firing .22 caliber guns at the wall of the house they rented. A bullet was taken from the house by investigators. The bullet was found to have come from the same gun that was used to shoot Julie. Only 6 companies made .22 caliber guns with bullets that had the right slots. In 2004, the male DNA found on Julie's leotard was matched to Anthony Sanchez's DNA. Of course, it was a match. At the time of the crime, Sanchez was only 18 years old. It is interesting to think about how quickly he would have been caught if he had called the right number on Julie's phone. In 2006, Anthony Castillo Sanchez was found guilty. It was agreed that he would die as punishment for the crime. Sanchez was still fighting his sentence as late as March 2023. He said that it was his father, not him, who did the wrong thing. Glenn Sanchez, his father, killed himself in April 2022 and told his partner that it was him the whole time. But detectives have already looked into the idea that the DNA might belong to Glenn Sanchez, and they found that it does not. According to court papers, the chance that the match was a mistake is 1 in 200 quadrillion for Caucasians, 1 in 20 quintillion for African Americans, and 1 in 94 quadrillion for Southwest Hispanics. On September 24, 2023, Anthony Sanchez will be put to death. Laura Salmon. During the Civil War, the fight of Stones River took place in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. This was a very famous fight. In recent years, Murfreesboro has grown a lot. Many people have moved there because of Middle Tennessee State University. In 1984, a college student did something wrong, and people in Murfreesboro still talk about it today. On May 31, 1984, on his way home from work, a farmer in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, found something shocking. The farmer saw some clothes lying around in the field, so he went over to see what was going on. When he did that, he saw that a girl's body was under the clothes. She was only wearing a bra and 2 pairs of jeans and a dark jacket to hide herself. One of the jacket's sleeves was around her neck. The first pair of jeans was found to be hers, and the second pair was found to be men's. The police also found a pair of underwear in one of her hands. She was named Laura Salmon, and she was 18 years old. She was born in Tennessee on October 6, 1965. Laura was a college student in the area at the time. She went to Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and she also worked at Kroger as a checker. The autopsy found that Laura died because her head was hit by something hard. The rocks that were near her body seemed to be the weapon. The blood on those rocks and other things showed that she had been hit in the head up to 10 times. During the investigation, the medical examiner also found that Laura had slept with someone in the last 24 to 48 hours before her death. There were no accidents or other signs that it wasn't on both sides' terms. The pair of men's pants that were on top of Laura's body was, of course, one of the most important clues for the police. Investigators found male DNA on the jeans, but it wasn't from the man Laura was with. Instead, it was from a different man. This DNA probably came from the person who did it. Unfortunately, DNA testing was just getting started, so detectives couldn't do much more with the DNA than store it. Then, the investigators focused on making a timeline of events, thinking that it would help them figure out what happened. Laura's day started with her going to work at the Kroger shopping store. The store's records showed that she left around 1 p.m. After that, she was meant to go to Middle Tennessee State University for a meeting with some office staff and to check her grades. She also planned to go swimming at her grandmother's house and at the university, but she never made it to either place. Laura's car was found near a store, which was miles from where her body was found. Investigators couldn't find any fingerprints in Laura's car that didn't belong to her, but they did find a hair that didn't belong to her. It was kept in the same place as the DNA proof they got from the jeans. Investigators also found dirt in the wheel wells, which is also important. The FBI lab found that they all fit together and that it was likely that Laura's car was on the road right next to where the crime happened. This meant that someone killed Laura and then took her car back to where she worked. The tip didn't do much except make the police think that the person who did it knew Laura. People who saw Laura the night before she died said that she was at a nearby nightclub. The witnesses said that Laura was dancing with a young man they didn't know, but the police couldn't find him. Laura's body was found in an area that high school and college students often used as a lover's lane. They went there to have parties, bonfires, and other things. Then people started to think that Laura met a guy at the bar after she got off work, and the two of them went to Lover's Lane. There, Laura turned down the guy who didn't know her, and he killed her. Since the police couldn't figure out who the young guy was, they talked to David Kyle Gilley, Laura's high school boyfriend. He was known to be jealous, but he had a good reason not to be there. His stepfather told the cops that David was home all day when Laura died, so he couldn't have done it. So he could not have been the one who did it. Just when investigators had no more leads to follow, a woman in Nashville, Tennessee, called the police with a possible tip. During the experience, she said that a man named John Taylor attacked her. Taylor reportedly told her he would treat her the same way he treated Laura. When the cops asked him about it, Taylor said he didn't hit the woman and that he hadn't talked about Laura or had anything to do with her. A background check showed that Taylor and Laura both went to the same college. He even went to the same gym, the Olympus Athletic Club and Spa. Taylor went to the same fraternity parties and events that Laura did. Even more important, Taylor was close to the university on the day Laura died. Taylor had a habit of hitting his girlfriends or other women he was with. All of this made it more likely that he was a suspect. The FBI analysts were then asked to match Taylor's hair to the foreign hair that was found in Laura's car. They got a report from the FBI saying that the hair they found in the car looked like John Taylor's hair. So, it's over, right? Yet another jerk was caught. But not quite. At the time, it was still going to be a long time before hair could be tested for mitochondrial DNA. About 20% of the population could have had hair like that. Even though it seemed like a done deal, this wasn't enough proof to put Taylor in jail. In this case, there would be a few more turns. Investigators found nothing that linked him to the crime scene or proved that he was with Laura that day. The men's jeans that were found at the crime scene had a 36-inch inseam and a 30-inch waist. Taylor was a small guy, so the jeans wouldn't have worked for him. Investigators had to move on to other suspects because they had no other choice. They looked into more than 100 possible suspects over the years, but nothing came of it. At her grave, Laura's mom, Lauren Mackey, made a promise to her daughter. She told Laura that she would do what was right. Lorraine didn't know how she would keep that word, but she decided it was the last thing she could do for Laura. Before help finally came, many long years went by. One of Laura's friends at college was Dan Goodwin. A few nights before her life was taken, he took her out. Dan asked her if she wanted to go to the movies, and on May 27, 1984, they went to see The Natural with Robert Redford at a matinee. Dan told Laura's mother at her funeral that he would help find the person who killed her. Dan got a job as a writer at the Daily News Journal in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, after he graduated from college. He wrote about the cops there. In 1987, he wrote about a number of unresolved cases, one of which was Laura's. Dan knew that he was more interested in doing police work than just writing about it. Dan stopped being a journalist after a few years and became a police officer. Laura Salmon's case was the very first cold case he was given. Dan's first step was to send all of the proof back to the forensic lab so that it could be tested. DNA technology had come a long way, and new tests had to be done. Dan went after other leads while that was going on. One of them was written by a high school student. A student at Oakland High School talked about the Laura Salmon's case in the year 2000. The student told everyone that in 1984, his father had killed a girl and thrown away her body. David Patterson was the boy's father. He had a record with the cops for a serious attack. Dan wanted to talk to Patterson, but when he tried, he found out that Patterson had died. He had been shot and killed. Dan, of course, still chose to keep going with the flow. The children of Patterson gave them their DNA. The DNA was matched to the DNA of a man that was found at the scene of the crime. It didn't match, so he was taken off the list of possible suspects. Then, Dan went back to John Taylor, who had been a suspect at first. His DNA did not match either. Dan also gave a sample of his DNA, in case you were asking. After testing, it was clear that Dan was not to blame. Dan then focused on one man who had slipped under the radar during the first probe. David Gilley was the name that caught his attention. David was Laura's boyfriend in high school. He was a year younger than her. The police didn't believe him at first because his dad gave them a different story. Dan, on the other hand, found that a witness directly contradicted that story. On the day that Laura's body was found, the witness saw David Gilley driving her car. She saw him not too far from the road that led to where Laura was. The witness said that David's face was blank and that he was just looking straight ahead. She was able to pick him out of a group of photos and from Laura's car. Dan also saw that David had a tendency to hurt people in his life. Among them was Laura Salmon's. When he was mad at her, he would sometimes grab her by the head and hit her head against cars, school lockers, or anything else that was close by. He even hit her sometimes. He knocked out 2 of her front teeth at one point. Dan couldn't believe that David Gilley was ruled out so quickly in the first probe. David was about 62 inches tall, and the men's shorts that were found at the crime scene would have fit him perfectly. Then, Dan asked Jerry Findley to help him with the case. He works to figure out how a crime happened. Jerry found tiny drops of blood on the jeans. It was splatter from a medium-speed strike. This kind of mess generally happens when a blunt object, like a rock, hits someone. Most of the blood was found just above the knee. This meant that the person who did this was on his knees when he hit Laura with the rocks. All of this just shows the police that the pair of men's jeans belonged to the person who killed Laura. It was already thought that Laura's blood was on the jeans, but DNA tests proved it. After that, Dan found David Gilley in Florida. By that time, Gilley had been separated twice and was working for the Public Works Department of Manitoba County. He had a record, which wasn't a big surprise. Gilley was arrested for assault, trying to break in, and fighting with the police. When Dan asked Gilley about what happened to Laura, he said again that he had nothing to do with it and that he wasn't to blame. In a strange turn of events, Gilley did say that the pants probably belonged to him. When the police told him that they thought the owner of the jeans was the person who did it, he quickly asked for a lawyer. Then, on May 31st, 2000, police got a sample of David Gilley's spit. DNA tests showed that Gilley's DNA was at the scene of the crime, so he was the one who killed Laura. David Gilley was finally caught 16 years after the crime. Dan the guy did what he said he would do to help Laura's mother solve the case, and Laura's mother did what she said she would do to make sure justice was done. People thought that jealousy was behind it. Gilley thought that if he couldn't have Laura, no one else could either. He didn't like it when she made new friends when she went to college while he was still in high school. He would follow her around a lot. Laura's mother tried to get Laura to get a protection order against Gilley, but Laura was too scared. Investigators think that Gilley lured Laura to the empty lover's lane, where he hit her in the head with rocks over and over again. Gilley took off his pants and left them at the scene of the crime when he saw that there was blood on them. He then took Laura's car to her place of work, where it would be found later. David Gilley went to court in September 2006. The defense said that the fact that another man's DNA was found at the scene of the crime showed that someone else was there. The judges never thought that any other DNA found at the scene of the crime belonged to the real killer. Gilley was found guilty of everything he was accused of, and he was given a life term in prison. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.